These can be some of the coolest and most interesting parts of your entire course. So, creeks. Could also be rivers, but more often than not, you're going to run into a creek and you're going to wish it looked a little more interesting. Clearly, again, you can just dig, what we call dig this in Unity in the terrain. Very imprecise, can be a little tricky, and you're just never going to get the coolest looking creek that way. There are now recipes, things through the OPCD tools, similar to the way you can do things with bunkers from AFROD's tools. I don't want you to think I'm putting those down at all. They are incredible. I'm using recipes in some of my bunker workflow now. But I feel like, especially in the case of bunkers, those are a beginning. If you want truly amazing landforms like bunkers, creeks, things like that, a little extra manual work goes a long way. But those things can really speed you up. In the case of something like a creek, especially one that's smaller of this size, I definitely think it's faster to do it manually. So this video is going to take a little longer, but I assure you, after a lot of trial and error, it's easy to do these pretty quick. Some of the theory is about the same though when you're talking about a creek versus a pond. As you can see, when splined, I have a custom 4, which is around this. That's this pink shape. Again, I do that, or I like to have that simply for geometry. I want a dense, what it causes here is more density, so you don't have just these big fat triangles. You've got additional density for modeling. It also gives you more loops because you can see, again, if you were to combine this with the rough, it's going to give you more of those loops. And I'm going to do the same thing with getting rid of this blend. Now, to start with, I am going to only combine these with the creek bed itself. So I'm going to go all into the water. I'm going to grab custom 4, blend, and then last click on the water base, Control J to join. Here, let me pause my feed. I'm going to get my screencast up again so you can see my key presses. All right, you should now see all my key presses on screen. So I have these all combined. Again, the process is to select all verts, merge by a distance. I usually go 0.001. And once you enter this the first time you're in a session in Blender, it stays as the default. And then I'm going to get rid of my extra materials over in the material panel. The only thing I really care about keeping is the water base. So now I have one shape for my water base, just like I did with my creek. Now this passes through a couple of different materials. So it goes from rough to deep rough here. I think in my other videos I've talked a little bit how I'm sort of anal on this stuff. I don't like little extra shapes like this. They're just kind of pointless. It's the same as this rough. I'm just going to join it. And I'd usually go through an entire course and clean up things like that ahead of time. Same here. I don't really... You've got some outlying shapes here. It would be easier, for instance, to model this if we had less shapes we could accidentally affect. So I would probably, I'm just going to go ahead and show you. I'm going to go to face mode, grab my circle select. I'm going to turn on my X-ray view, which means I'll grab everything. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to move these faces to where they make more sense. I'm just going to remove them from this shape that is way off the beaten path over here. And in my type A brain, I'm going to separate the selection. And I'm going to join it to that. And merge my verts. It just makes more sense that that's a shape and that's a shape. All right. Now that I've cleaned up my geometry, I'm going to do the same types of steps I would do on the other waterbed we did. Here we have a little bit of a disconnect. This is not a loop, so if you see there would be a loop going through here, but you can see that for whatever reason when it meshed, it's broken right there. This is not necessary, but it can be helpful to just use the knife key to draw through and just connect that. It'll give you a better, those loops are what give you a better, more natural looking geometry when you drop things. So if you want, you could go through and do all of that, kind of optional though. All right. Now, what have we learned? We've learned that we don't ever want to accidentally separate any of these perimeter vertices, right? So I've done this before. Whoops, cancel. I've done this before. I'm going to show you again. So let's say we were going to drop our creek bed. So we have just our inner vert selected. Going to go to proportional. We're going to do a move with the G and down with the Z only. And again, the mouse wheel is going to give us how much influence if we're just grabbing only those or influencing more. And in this case, if we go too much, we're going to separate the meshes. That's bad, right? Even if it's just a tiny one that you can't really pick up on, that's almost worse because you'll keep going, and when you get it into Unity, you'll notice, oh crap, I made a little gap, and then fixing gaps is never fun. So the easy way to avoid that, just like we did with the pond, we're going to hide this outer. We're going to hide it like that, okay? Now, if we select everything that's not hidden, and then we use our Control minus key to kind of tab down to less, again, you see in some areas we've actually lost any selection in the middle. So that's going to give us, if we were to drop this, that's not going to drop. That's not very helpful, right? So what can we do? Well, we want to add more geometry. So we're going to unhide everything. And the nice thing about this, let's make sure we're zoomed in where we can not clip. Because we combined these shapes, it gave us all of these loops within our shape. Now the cool thing is we can slide those very easily, and we can add more. So do Control R. You can add additional loops in there like that, right? You can subdivide, which is, you wouldn't want to do it on the perimeter shape, but if you were to select the center of this, all you'd have to do is go right click S and it will subdivide. That's certainly a nice easy way to do it, to add a ton of geometry quickly. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. It does leave some oddities occasionally. You can see that what it creates is faces that have 4 vertices and not an edge between, and that's on every spot. It's subdivided each face. It's not really a big deal. It can cause some strange looks depending on how you decide to model things, and it's not super necessary you have that much geometry. I'm a bigger fan of, for instance, just sliding out loops and making additional loop cuts. So again, we can just slide and loop cut, right? That's really our easiest way to do things. Even this looks like it's not quite a full loop. Again, you're going to see that's because, oh, see, when we slid, we have something here. You always want to check what your geometry looks like after you do a loop slide or any geometry moves before you move on to the next step, because if things go wrong, you can back up and you can fix things, but only so far. So make sure that you're checking. See, something's going on up here. It doesn't like something about over here. You can see it's sliding weird, and I'm not sure what it's doing there. Let's try another join and merge and make sure we don't, at a smaller distance, make sure that's not the problem. Nope. But something is weird about this particular area, and then it doesn't want to slide that. I'm going to pause and investigate, and I'll report back. Another alternative to adding more geometry quickly is to do a smooth and then some loop cuts. You don't really have to even slide them. Once again, don't want to ever do anything to the perimeter one. So if we select that loop and invert it, and then right click smooth, and I would do it probably on all 3 axes, otherwise you're going to end up with some poor results. So that's just going to kind of relax and space everything out a bit. I'm going to drag that up. Then you can go in and loop cut as well. And even though it looks a little weird, it does work just fine. And then the last thing you can do with perimeter, if you have the perimeter one selected, you can Control-Shift-R again and drag out. And that can be very beneficial to have extra right at the edge. It can help with controlling normals when you're doing things like that. So if you need more than one, you have to go back and grab the outside again. All right. And then maybe we want to do one more smooth to kind of space those a little bit more. And just like that, we've added a ton of geometry, but it's cleaner than just doing a subdivide. Everything is still connected, all verts have edges, everything looks good. Now, how fast is it to create your creek? I would select our outer two and invert it. Then go, you can use Control Negative to kind of tab in and kind of find the middle. Make sure that you have consistently grabbing all of our parts like that. All right. You know what? I just realized I didn't do what I told you should do. I did not hide my outside ones. So undo, go back to here. I'm going to hide those first, and then I'm going to tab into my center. And I want to make sure I have something grabbed everywhere. So if I go back out, I've got at least a little bit in play all the way along. Now G, Z, see how much influence I want here. All right, drop it down however much you want. Now we have a creek bed, and what we have right now is not too different from what you get with a recipe, right? So yes, that probably took longer, although if you needed to write your own recipe, that would certainly take some time. But by doing some quick additional steps, just like we did with the water base, we can actually make this a lot more interesting. So if I go back into my vert mode, you can do this in multi-stages. You can drop this down into somewhere a little less. So now we have some smaller areas where we're going to make it a little deeper. And actually by doing a large drop or something like that, you're going to kind of skew some edges. See how you've created some ripples and stuff in there? That's deeper than a creek would typically be, right? So then you might want to go out a little bit, change your influence, and then you can raise up kind of the whole thing, but you're still going to keep some of that rippling that you created, right? Now, if you remember when we had our original shape, that custom 4 was actually part of the rough around it, or would be considered that in the LiDAR. So our creek doesn't actually probably start until somewhere in here, which is fine. And it gives us the chance to, we're gonna go tab into probably about where the creek is and where we have some of that extra geometry. And we are going to, let's see, where's a nice middle spot we can look at? In here. Just by playing with how many different places you can drop from and influence from, that's going to give you a lot of options as far as what your profile ends up being. So I would suggest just doing it in multi-stages, kind of is what we're going for, right? So now we've got a far more interesting creek bed. It's honestly pretty deep. I mean, you're probably not going to see a lot of creeks that are that deep. Oh, a quick way to shallow a creek or something is to actually use the smooth, but don't do it too much because you don't want to ruin some of that look you've got. All right, that's pretty good. And then also you can go in and, just like we did before, go along, grab some random areas and create some manual interest, right? It just doesn't take much. So this section in particular, if I focus on it, it's a very deep but very kind of plain looking area. And so one way to add some interest to that is to grab some random areas along it. Again, you can use the trick of going from the top, and you can just add. By pulling it in, it's going to be more shallow. By pushing it out, it's going to be more deep. But you don't have to do any of this. I mean, you could be done right now if you wanted. You've already created something more interesting than your standard creek would look anyway. And again, it's pretty deep. I'm not, if you can tell, I'm not loving how deep this creek is. I just went a little overboard. So just be really careful about how deep you dig or how much you pull down with influence, and then just check it as you go. I'm just going to raise the whole creek bed up a little bit like that. In general, yeah. All right, let's grab that and put it into Unity, and we'll see where we're at. All right, so we're back in Unity now with it, and you know, you can see the general shape there. It looks a little crap. That's because we've done 0 vert painting on this yet. I did assign it the water-based material, same one we used for the pond, so our paint scheme will be the same. Therefore, we go back here into Vert Paint, and we take a look at this creek. The only colors it has for Vert Paint, it inherited. So all this black is coming from way back when we joined the blend shape, which has some black involved, right? So what we want to do is, if you remember, we use black as our base, right? So we're going to go in and we're going to flood the whole thing black to start, just all of it. And then if you remember, we use green was our general rough color, right? We just take the outside, do Control++, kind of just add a few layers of the green in there. And then the wrinkle here is this passes through another kind of shape, which is this deep rough. Now, our material in Unity does not have a color set up to match deep rough, but I would suggest just using blue for that. You can use any color scheme you want. This tends to be the ones I stick with. I use green to match something that's regular rough, blue to match something that's deep rough. I have all my deep rough painted blue. All that just makes sense, and I keep track of it that way. So without changing anything, but going into the X-ray mode and using the circle, I can control and deselect all the things I just painted green that touch regular rough. And I can go in here and go right up to the border where it's touching that. And now everything that is still selected, I will just paint blue like that, right? And I will export that. And off screen, I'm going to import that into Unity, and you should immediately see a pretty nice looking creek. All right, so now we've got our green paint so that we're matching. Let's use something to zoom in here and focus. We've got our green paint matching our rough around it. We have our water base of rocks. You could duplicate your water base and name it creek and use a different base texture for it if you didn't want it to be rocky, if you wanted it to be muddy or in any way different. If we look over here, we're going to see on our deep rough area that does not match, right? So here's our border. That's not matching. Again, we're going to have to go into up here and set up that match. So we have our water base that we're going to go to, and we're doing blue channel. And for this one, we have deep rough. So we're going to go blue, because that's painted blue. There you go. Now that matches, and now we have a creek that goes through both. You can see I was going quick. My geometry is a little sloppy here. It goes down and then down again. Kind of weird. You could easily smooth that or just take more time than I did to set things up accurately. Right now, not super pretty the way I've got that, but it works. So let's go draw a quick spline in there. So we're going to go create 3D ram spline. We're going to do river spline. All right, let's add a quick ram river spline to it so we can see our creek, and then we can adjust if we need to. So we're going to go click our stream following that. All right, we have our general splining in for our creek. Adjust it however you see fit. It looks like a little bit of a hard turn there. And we need to make, obviously, these points a little different, a little wider. But that's for a different time. We're going to raise this just a little. So we have our creek flowing through there. And now this is where you can go in and individually tweak things and change your geometry if you need to. Because, for instance, right here it looks like we're very low over here. And this is where a little manual work can really make things perfect, but sometimes that's not going to be necessary. You can see right here, this is our low area. Obviously this is too low, so we want to select both those. Probably grab through here. We want this bank to be a little higher, right? So that the creek doesn't flow out into our rough there. You can kind of get down and see, you know, we want the water to stay within there. All right, so now the water should kind of stay where we want it. Pretty close. You can see we improved it right there, but still right here we're a little high right here. So if you can't lower your water enough to make it not go into your rough, that's where you're going to have to go in and adjust your terrain height a little bit for your water. But pretty quick and easy to do that, right? Then using things like Vert paint, just like we did on the other, you can, if your creek isn't a mile long and it would take you days, you can obviously go in here. Here the bed, it's pretty steep and eroded. That's kind of a good look. I don't think you need to do much there, but this is where you get artistic. Or if you have reference photos and you know that you want to adjust things, like right here, it just looks like, to my eye, there would probably be more grass. So you know, see, are we in the deep rough area? So we're in deep rough right now. So we're going to use blue to come in here. Let's make it a little bigger. And just kind of paint down like that. And maybe it makes sense that this first lip we accidentally created of height, maybe that's a grass bank, and then it drops down into rock after that. So adding little details like that is going to go a long way. And maybe sometimes you are adding rock instead of grass. Maybe you want to take the rock back a little ways, right? And so maybe right here, you got this little, grass knob sticking out there. Just do what makes sense, what you think looks, you know, reasonable for your creek. The last thing I'll talk about here, this also gets talked about in some of my bunker things, and that is fixing normal data transfer. If you just cannot get a good blend, it's real subtle here, but you can see the grass does not blend perfectly. You have, it's lighter and then it gets darker. You can see it very pronounced down here, where even though we matched up our material channel editor, we still do not have a blend right here. It's not the same. And that is because of those normals. I've discussed this a little bit before, but let's do it again. If we were to go in here and look at this area on here, because we have adjusted geometry, but we were hiding the borders, so those were not adjusted. You can kind of see it here. If I go into the matte cap view, this is what shows us. This is under, if you put it on single and then you go into matte cap and click on the big circle, you can go to normal check. It's easiest to see this if you turn off any wireframe or outline. You almost should see nothing. like you can almost not even see where one shape exists and the next starts, right? That's good. That means everything matches from a normal standpoint. You can see my sloppy creek work is a little bit all over the place. Specifically, between these two, where we don't have a good blend, the number one reason when you're doing this kind of work is there is a problem with the normals. To fix it, you would select the perimeter loop, and what you do is you want to transfer your normals from your rough that surrounds it into that. But because there is a border here between, it intersects both the rough and deep rough, we only want to do one at a time. So we're going to select our whole outer loop, and I use X-ray on to make sure I don't miss any. And similar to how we did before, we're going to deselect all of this, which ended up looking pretty good anyway, because we only want to transfer to the deep rough where it doesn't look good. We're going to go right up to where that outline is, and then in the OPCD tools under normals data transfer, we are going to assign these vertices that are selected, the perimeter ones that touch the deep rough, we're going to assign it deep. Go back to object mode. We'll make sure we start by selecting our one we just assigned. Then we're going to shift click what we want to move from. So we're moving from deep to our water base transfer. And what you should see if we deselect those things and turn off our outline is that it's a smooth transition now. You can't see it anymore, right? So now if we export and update those, that blend should now be perfect in Unity. And I'm copying it over. There. You can see at the very border, it is now a smooth transition. My geometry is still a little wacky. I'm not real proud of the way I dug that creek quickly, but in most areas, it's pretty clean. The best way to avoid creating that problem and still do manual work is to make sure that you deselect at least a couple rows of vertices. That will also help make it so that you don't accidentally separate things and you have a nice clean transition. You could do a creek, and there's another one here, right down here, by just selecting all meshes that could potentially move and surround it. But if you're not careful, you could end up making more terrain changes than you mean to. Instead of just making an interesting creek, you could start making some changes that make your course somewhat inaccurate, I guess. The same way as before, I'm going to select and merge all that and go remove things I don't need. I'm going to right away just flood this whole thing. And if we look at verts now, I'm going to select something tighter so we can focus. We have our same basic setup we started as before. I definitely want to try and make this a little more dense in my geometry. So I'm going to do some of the same tricks as before. Make sure I'm doing some of that. All right. Now instead of hiding by outer perimeter loops, our other option is make active in edit mode everything that could potentially change. So I'm going to grab obviously this rough shape, this deep rough shape, that one, this one, this one. Make sure that one. So literally just, you can just drag select across at various points. If you end up selecting too many, you're probably going to slow down your system a little bit, but now I have that much active. Like I even have this huge shape back here active, which is going to slow us down a little bit. Then you can, in face mode, you can select Shift G by material. Now the only active we have is our creek, and we can go back into that. Same kind of thought process as before. We're going to go Control negative in but we don't want to ever have, we want to try and infect it all somehow. If you want to be really interesting about things, you can just manually select stuff this way, and that's going to give you some interest when you drop it, because it's going to have some edges. Anything like that that's pointed out, any little variations, you could deselect some areas like that. That's going to create just some more interesting edges, not those straight drops, straight walls, things that look unnatural or look man-made. Like, it looks great. Some of those recipes, some of the styles of doing it that way, that would really give the appearance of like a berm, like something in a man-made dug canal. But obviously we're going for something here that's a little more interesting. So there, I have things selected. Now I have the entire surrounding mesh area selected. I don't need to worry about things separating, right? I'm going to negative out some of that. Make sure my proportional is active. Move, hit Z key so we can go only up and down. And you can see we're affecting all the meshes around it. And again, my trick is to try not to affect the meshes around it too much. But if you pull more, you're going to get really interesting edges. If it feels like you've got some interesting edges but you've gone too deep, then all you need to do is change your influence. So we can go like that. Then maybe I'll expand my selection, and then I'll move that up a little bit like this. And you can see that I have made some really cool looks, some nice variation, but it's pretty jagged, so I'm probably going to want to do a smooth. I'm going to expand my selection a bunch. You know, to be safe, I'm going to go in and just do, you can't smooth across shapes, even if they're all active. So I'm going to make sure I'm only selecting my creek shape. I don't want to select, I do not want to smooth, come on, I don't want the perimeter of this. So I don't want to accidentally smooth the perimeter. So I'm going to make sure I'm not selecting any of those. Then right click and smooth. And that is a little more, I did a better job on that one. All right. So that's definitely a good way to create a better looking one. All right, I'm going to show you one more thing or way you can do this. I reverted back and I'm going to go through my same process again, joining these. But the one difference this time is I am not going to delete my water-based material from there. I'm going to delete the blend, which is going to leave me with my water-based interior, but I'm going to maintain my creek bed material because it'll give me another option for selections. So I can do the same thing for geometry at this point. It's just a shape with two materials selected. It's not going to be I didn't get all my stuff joined. It's not going to be a problem for any of the modeling or selections. So I'm going to still increase my geometry. Even here, it looks like a border, but it's not. It's not going to be a problem. So I'm adding geometry. And what leaving this does is gives me another area to select, another way to select a certain area. This is off topic a little bit, but I want to address one thing. So here's where a bridge is. Right here, there's a bridge in the LiDAR. So you can see that the LiDAR picked up on that and calls it your creek bed. You obviously want to try and get rid of that. Maybe the easiest way to do that was before you conformed your meshes, you should have done some work in the Unity terrain. Again, you can also smooth creek areas slightly in Unity before bringing it in and conforming it. Terrain-wise, and then that does make some things easier. But if you failed to, you can come in here and just very carefully manually drop that so it's at least similar to your height of your rest of your creek, right? And we're going to eventually smooth it, so it's not going to be a huge deal. I mean, that's pretty close, good enough for us. Now, the reason I have left my material is it allows me to go click a face of that, and I can get a very fast grab of just that. So if I want a very defined creek, if I want a creek bed that has somewhat of a lip to it, some of a defined washout, think somewhere like Quail Hollow has a very famous creek on the 18th. It's kind of a maintained creek, so it's got very specific flow areas. It's not, here's a picture to kind of say what I'm trying to say better. I'm just gonna add one more loop in here. I can just tell I'm gonna want it. So if I have this all selected and I go to Vert, then I can go to Vert mode. And when I drop that, I can have a very defined spot that I'm dropping, right? Now, even though I want this to be pretty defined, I can still use some of the old tricks to try and give it some interest at least. And it just makes selecting things a bit easier, I find. You can always go back, grab it again, just like that. And it allows you to play with things in a more controlled manner. You'll still want to remove that shape at the end of the day, or that material, sorry, not that shape, that material. But by leaving it in place while we're doing our work, it gives you a pretty defined shape for playing with your geometry, right? It makes it much easier. It's going to probably end up giving you a cleaner look, a little more man-made, a little more defined. If you want it to be really defined, it just depends on how much influence you give things. Like if we go back up like that, use our Control Plus to grab a little more. So we've gone one loop farther out. We're going to drop down a little bit like that. Now we've got a very defined creek, but also something with a little more interesting edges, right? And again, none of this stops us from doing the same things we did before. So if I grab these and hide them so I don't accidentally influence them, in high visibility areas, for instance, right off a tee box or somewhere like that where the player's definitely going to see it, you can add some interest by doing any of the other tricks that we'd already talked about as far as overhead randomness, just grabbing individual verts. And if you have reference that shows certain areas that are a little more defined, just any quick little individual random stuff like that is just going to benefit the final look to make it look a little more like nature and a little less man-made. Now when we're decided we're pretty much done, or we feel like we're all done, we're going to go in and we're going to delete our custom 4, going back to where we want our final shape to be, like that. And then that is when we would go in and do our vert painting. So advanced custom, we're going to make sure everything start with black. Oops, gotta be flood fill. And then at this point, you know, our bank doesn't really start until a bit in, so we're gonna keep going like that and do all that as green, like that. All right, I'm gonna export these and bring them into Unity. All right, here's that spot in Unity, and you can see this is a much more defined, straight up and down type of creek like that. You could smooth individual areas to create spots where there is a little gentler slope into it. Give yourself some variety that way. Look at your reference, try and figure out where it's supposed to look a little shallower or steeper. Adding some of that variety is what's going to really sell it. But already you can see the definition you can get is far better. The control, the more interest you can get is far better than you can get just by digging something inside of the terrain in Unity. So I would advocate for smoothing gently most of your creek bed, splining that extra outside edge to give yourself more geometry, adding loops, and then just drop it and be very careful. Again, here there's just a tiny bit of normal effect going on here. You can see that it's a little bit mismatched, but in general, it's pretty easy. Here's a spot where wherever it's going to be steep at the edge is where you're going to see that the most. So that's somewhere you'd have to do a transfer. It's always kind of a good idea. But there you go. That is creeks in a nutshell. Then it's just down to planting and adding water. So hope this was helpful. It's not really for the faint of heart. You do have to be familiar with Blender, but clearly Blender is where it's at for creating really high quality modeling and coarse details, something that you're never going to get just by conforming and going and assigning materials. Don't skip Blender. It's not just for bunkers. All right. Thanks for watching.